Before we start this podcast, I'd like to mention a charity that is very close to my heart, Auditory Verbal UK. Our son Henry was diagnosed profoundly deaf at 7 weeks old, and we worried that Henry would be isolated, ostracised, and lonely. Thankfully, we were told about auditory verbal therapy and how innovative and effective it was, and we signed up right away. AV UK supports parents to turn every single moment of every day into a listening and speaking opportunity. So successful is their therapy that by the age of 4 and with the aid of cochlear implants, Henry was talking on a par with hearing children and attending mainstream school. That transition from the first diagnosis to being a chatty, confident, gregarious 4-year-old boy felt and still feels pretty miraculous. Fast forward to now, he's going to university in September and the world is his oyster. Today, there are around 7,200 deaf children under the age of 5 in the UK who face a lifetime of disadvantage without access to early support. AV UK currently supports 80 families directly. The charity's ultimate goal is to enable all deaf children to have the opportunity to access AV therapy if their parents want their child to learn to listen and talk as we did. It is a small charity, and any donation will make a huge difference. To donate or learn more, please visit www.avuk.org. Thank you. Hello and welcome to Bandwidth Conversations, a podcast that finds out about the stories and journeys of artists, performers, and rock stars of life. What do Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter, Inception, Dunkirk, Gravity, American History X, The Notebook, and Austin Powers all have in common? The answer isn't just epic storytelling or unforgettable visuals, it's the man behind the music. Today, I'm joined by Paul Broucek, President of Music at Warner Brothers, whose fingerprints are on the soundtracks of some of the most iconic films of our time. With over 4 decades in the industry, Paul has collaborated with legendary composers, visionary directors, and groundbreaking producers, shaping the emotional heartbeat of cinema. Orchestras to Oscar winners, his journey is packed with stories that span genres, generations, and global stages. This year, that's 2025, he was awarded the LACO Hollywood Ally Award. And the video that goes with the award is a testament to how well regarded, loved, and appreciated he is by composers, directors, and musicians alike. I had the privilege of meeting Paul at Glastonbury Festival 2025, thanks to the generous hospitality of Philip Moros from Cutting Edge Group, now proudly partnered with Warner Brothers. So tune in. This is going to be a masterclass in film music, creativity, and the magic behind some of our favorite all-time movie scenes. Paul, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, Katie. Thank you for having me.
I'd like to start right back at the beginning. You're the youngest of 4. Where did music feature in your childhood?
My mother was a lifetime school teacher, and my dad was a salesman for most of his life in the food industry, and their great love was music. My dad, I think if he could have been a chorister in an opera choir, that would have been his dream. And he sang semi-professionally in a church choir, a quartet, most of my childhood. So he loved harmonies, and with 4 kids, and there's a 10-year spread between the 4 of us. And my mom's from New York. I grew up born and raised in Chicago. This is back in the early 60s. We take car trips to see my mom's relatives in upstate New York. And radio wasn't what it is now. And my dad didn't really like popular music, which is a big irony for me because I embraced it. But he loved classical and he loved opera. But he would teach us 4 kids 4-part harmony. We would learn songs, spirituals, folk songs, and then we would be the after-dinner entertainment at our relatives' homes.
A bit like the Von Trapp family singers.
Yeah, it was great. So harmony singing was a big part, and singing around the piano was a big part of our growing up. With a 10-year spread, my oldest sister went on in college, and the quartet broke up after a while. But I still would sing with my sister, who's 4 years older than I am, and my brother, who was 7 years older. We loved to do Everly Brothers songs. Sibling harmonies are really interesting because you have a similar voice box. So the blend of siblings singing together is always something special. So love of singing. I joined church choir about age 7. I got in school choirs, all city choirs, a cappella, madrigals. I think I was in some kind of singing group from the time I was 7 till I was 18. That was very informative of just my love of music. But I think the real time when people say, when did you realize you wanted to do music? What was an event or what was a time in your life? When I was just about to turn 9 years old, I got rheumatic fever, which is a strep infection that nastily lodges itself on the valves of the heart.
Oh, wow.
So my ankles swole up. I ran a 104 Fahrenheit temperature, maybe a little bit higher. I mean, it just came on like that. Had a really strict old school doctor, and he said, you can't move. I had to be carried to the bathroom. I was bedridden for about 8+ weeks. I couldn't watch TV because, rightly so, I know now, watching television is not restful. So I became a very avid reader, and my aunt Elsie, spinster aunt, ironically bought me a transistor radio, a little transistor radio. And that was my gateway to the world. I listened to that thing. I memorized the top 40 radio, all the hits, pop hits.
Yes.
Watched the chart positions. I just did a deep dive like some kids might do with sports stats. And I think that's really when it happened, when I realized that how important music was. And it was a portal to another world that I wanted to live in.
Yes.
So I thank my Aunt Elsie for that transistor radio from Sears Roebuck catalog.
And that's a really good lesson for when something terrible happens, that actually something good can come out of it.
It's really interesting. I've been told and discovered in adult life that a lot of people like Scorsese, JFK, there's a list of people who went on, did greater things than I've done, who had childhood illnesses. And they cite that as a turning point.
So you then carried on at school, and did you then always have in your mind that music was what you wanted to do as a career?
A few years after I got sick, this phenomenon called the Beatles happened. And kids of my age just remember where we were when they came over to the States and appeared on Ed Sullivan, which was a famous show on Sunday nights in the States. And you might have a talking puppet before the Beatles. I mean, it was like a variety show. It's wacky. But the Beatles were on several times, and then the British invasion happened there. So that was like, oh my God, this is great. And at that point, I became an Anglophile. There was no turning back. It's like anything that was happening in London, I wanted to know about. And so then kids start picking up guitars, they learn songs, they form bands. By the time I was a teenager, 13, 14, I started to learn how to play guitar. I'd take piano lessons, I'd play clarinet in a school band, but guitar was where it's at the time. It didn't have proper instruction. I never took a lesson until I was an adult. So I'd go over to my friend Ed's house, who knew more chords than I did. I'm like, how do you play that G7 sus thing? There's stories about the Beatles used to do that when they were kids. They would learn that some guy across town in Liverpool knew how to play some weird, obscure chord, and they'd get on a bus and they'd go over to like, how do you do that? How do you play that? That's the equivalent of the oral tradition of learning guitar back in the day. So by the time I was 14, I was in my first electric band.
What was the band called? Do you remember?
The Spirit of 69.
Okay.
My sisters giggled because my parents didn't know what it might mean.
Oh.
The lead singer, he was a jerk. But yeah, I was in a few bands until I was about my mid-20s, and then I hung up the band thing. But that band probably played the most of any of the bands I was in. There were local community centers and park rec centers, and we played that whole circuit in high school, and it was really fun. I still play music as a hobby with a group of grown men who, rather than playing poker on a Thursday night, we get together and we just improvise.
You were at Oak Park River High School, and then after that, you went to university at, now my English accent would say Willamette, but is it Willamette?
It is Willamette. I thought it was Willamette until I got there. It's the Willamette River Valley in Oregon.
Okay.
So how did I end up there? I was really attracted to the West Coast and the lifestyle and the weather and all that sort of things. Chicago's a beautiful city, and I'm so glad I grew up there, but the winters are brutal. So I wanted to go on the West Coast. My dad wasn't a big fan of California. My dad was very traditional conservative, bless him. So he said, maybe the Northwest is somewhere you want to look. And so I found a small liberal arts college, which was a university only because it had a college of law. But it was essentially a small liberal arts college. I don't remember how many students, but it wasn't a big place. My high school was enormous. Oak Park River Forest High School was enormous. There were over 900 kids in my graduating class. There were over 4,000.
Oh my goodness.
In the high school, yeah. So I had enough of the big high school. I wanted something smaller, more intimate, because I finished my junior high school in eighth grade. We have over here. I switched schools and I went to a smaller local public school, and there were 47 in my class as opposed to the Catholic school where I was going, where there were 150 in my class. Three classes of 50. I just felt I was lost. I wasn't an athlete. I wasn't the smartest. I wasn't the best looking. I wanted to find my lane, and I went to a small school with 47 kids in our graduating class, and I really excelled. I'd had a good experience. I wanted to go back to that. So I went to Willamette for 2 years, got what we would call our core requirements to graduate in a bachelor's degree, but missed Chicago, missed the big city. And I had friends that were going to a place called Columbia College Chicago, which is essentially an art school. Their motto is a school for creatives, a college for creatives, and all disciplines: film, radio, music, dance, creative writing, all that kind of stuff. And that really appealed to me. So I moved back to Chicago and I went to Columbia College Chicago and had another great experience. It wasn't a big place, and I found my lane and found my tribe and found my mentors, and away we went.
Presumably, while you were at Willamette, you were still performing in bands.
Yes, not as actively. I was able to scrape together the money and get a 4-track tape recorder. And that's where I really found my love of recording music, which later my career as a recording engineer and then in the studios. So I started working with myself, creating stuff, doing sketches, and with a few other friends that we would work on each of the songs. And that was the beginning of my becoming a producer, executive producer of music.
With that in mind, what was your first post-university job?
I worked in a studio that was run by a couple hippies in San Francisco called Retina Circle.
Okay.
They're hippies in all regards. They couldn't run a business. They had no business acumen. And not that I was a business major or anything, but I always wanted to either have my own company, have a record company. I realized and self-identified somewhere along the way that I didn't want to be in bands. My first real mentor was a guy named William Russo. And he ran the music department at Columbia. It was called the Center for New Music on the near north side of Chicago. And Bill was a jazz player. He was a valve trombonist in Stan Kenton's band, and he was composer in residence in the 50s. Now, I'm not a jazzer, although I've become more of one as I've advanced in my musical pursuits. But I absolutely love Bill. He was such an inspiration. And he seemed to recognize in me a hunger, maybe raw talent, but definitely a hunger. And when you're teaching, and I've done some mentoring, when you have somebody that's eager to learn, it's really easy to be a mentor. So Bill took me on and gave me a lot of encouragement. And basically, he was the first person that told me that I could do what I'm doing. That's important.
Yes.
And that's one of the reasons why in the last 15 years or so, I've made myself available to be a guest speaker in all kinds of courses around the country. And because of things like Zoom, I don't have to travel. And I've done media arts classes. I've done music classes. I've done film classes, general topics, done panels. I think it's really important to give back. And I make myself available. We have a robust intern program in Warner Brothers Music. And this afternoon, I'm going to have 2 meetings with our summer interns who are winding down and sit with them for like an hour and like, okay, what do you want to ask me? What do you want to know? What can I tell you? Because to quote Hamilton, the questions I get the most is they want to be in a room where it happens. How does it work? How do people talk to each other? How do they deal with conflict in an open setting? How do they encourage each other? How do they have honest conversations? That's what I wanted to know. When I started to work in the studios, proper studios, by the time I moved to LA, went to work at the record plant, which is one of the top studios in the world.
Yes.
It's always my thing. It's better to fetch coffee for a genius than to be a vice president to an idiot.
Yes, absolutely.
I put myself in the best position to learn. So I went to work for these hippies. This is the mid-'70s. They gave me $200 a month. And I was living on food stamps and crashing on my sister's couch, who had moved to San Francisco. I ran their studio, I booked it. And then in the off hours, I went down in the studio with the guys, the engineers, and said, how do you do this? What is this? How does this work? What is this? What is this microphone? What is this? The equivalent in cameras or cinematography is, what's this lens? Why do you use this one in this situation? And I'm still a gear geek. And when I get together people come in. We just had a general meeting with a film composer yesterday with my group. And I know they gloss over when I start asking the composer, so what digital audio workstation do you use? Have you tried this plugin? Oh, I love that microphone. And I can see my crew just going, here he goes.
Oh, but I bet the composer loves it.
Oh, yeah. No, we can go off. You find kindred spirits and then you start talking about this stuff.
Yes. After Retina, and maybe, Paul, I've got this out of order, but you had a pretty auspicious start to your film career as you were assistant engineer to the Academy Award-winning sound designer and picture editor Walter Murch, and that was on Apocalypse Now, no less. And I watched it the other week and I'd forgotten how disturbing and surreal and suspenseful it was. And it's directed by Francis Ford Coppola. And I read that it was beset with issues. Marlon Brando was unprepared. There were terrible storms that were going on, which kept ruining the sets. And then even Martin Sheen had some kind of breakdown and a near fatal heart attack. So anyway, despite all of that, it is still considered one of the greatest films ever to have been made. And you worked on it. How did it happen?
I've got a bridge. The Retina Circus thing was a short-lived, maybe a year.
Okay.
Before they went out of business because they were so inept. But I got a taste of that. And then I decided to go back and take one last crack at playing live music. So I found a young singer named Elise, who's still a dear friend of mine in San Francisco. She was a disco singer. This is the end of the 70s. And we formed a band. I was her musical director, manager. And I put a band together, a 5-piece band with 2 background singers. And we played the whole Bay Area, Northern California disco circuit. We were on the same circuit as Sylvester and Two Tons of Fun, It's Raining Men, and it was a gas. We played in every gay and lesbian bar in Northern California. The whole band was straight white guys. The singers were, one woman was black and queer, and this is the late 70s, and the other background singer we didn't know about, and our lead singer was bisexual. So we were way ahead of the curve. It was great, and we had a good run of it, and we did some recording, and we took it so far, but we just ran out of steam and ran out of money, and I needed a job. So by that point, I'd made friends with people there's a Sausalito record plant, or there was at the time, and I knew one of the women who worked there, and she introduced me to a guy named Tom Scott, not the horn player, but Tom Scott, who had then gone to work for Coppola's company called American Zoetrope. Okay. And it was through Tom, through my friend Barbara Buckley, and then Tom Scott, that I've heard that they were hiring what you guys call tape operators, for the film mix of Apocalypse Now. And so, A, I needed a job, and 2, it's like working for Francis Coppola on Apocalypse Now, sign me up. And I got an interview and I got hired. And I spent most of 1979 in the back of the film dub stage, loading reels of 35 millimeter mag and 2-inch open reel analog. It was all analog.
Yes.
And I'm really glad that I caught the end of the analog era into the digital era, because now I meet young engineers and producers and I go, oh God, you lived in the age of analog. Cutting tape with a razor blade. Said, nerve-wracking. When you're cutting a multi-track recording with a band sitting in the control room, you measure about 20 times before you cut.
Yeah.
So that's how it happened. And it turned out to be just a fantastic experience. And Walter Murch, who I'm actually going to see tonight, I haven't seen him in years. He's just like the sage, like a professor. His head's somewhere in the clouds, but very intellectual clouds. We would sit in the back of the room after we load a sequence for Reel 2 sound effects, and he'd work on it for hours. So once we loaded, there was not a lot to do. And so we get to sit in the back of the room in the actual dub stage and just watch him work. And every so often, after a couple hours, he'd just get up, start his chair, turn around. And I don't even know if he'd ask, do you have any questions? But that was sort of the understanding that, okay, Walter's open for questions. Why did you do that? And what was that? And how that? And it changed my thinking in a fundamental way. And it was really a great time for setting me up for the 80s, because I've never thought of sound or music just as music. Sound is musical. All sound is musical. It has tonal frequencies. And that was part of Walter's whole thing, is that there was no differentiation. They merged it together. And there were a lot of things that we did that now are standard, but taking helicopter blades in the scene, you see the helicopters flying across the landscape, and they'd put it through a synthesizer and oscillate it. So and it was making musical, it was a trigger for a musical synthesizer. We were doing all kinds of stuff like that. And it just blew my mind.
So everything, like even the chugging of the boat and the gunshot and the explosions, they add to that.
Yeah, not all of it. Some using room tones, using pitches. I think I'm correct in saying Walter was the first person to get the credit called sound designer on an earlier Francis Coppola film called The Conversation. It's a masterpiece in sound, and it's a really good film with Gene Hackman if you guys ever want to sit and watch it.
Yeah, I haven't seen it.
About 1973, I think. So that opened my mind to thinking about music and sound as not separate things, but as all the same thing.
Then you moved to the plant, which was founded by legendary music engineer Chris Stone.
Chris was actually the businessman, and his partner, Gary Kellgren, they started Record Plant in New York sometime in 67, 68. And then they opened the LA Record Plant around 69. And then the early 70s, they opened the Sausalito Record Plant, which then became the plant after Chris sold it. And I went up to run it in 1983 after it had separated from the mothership. Gary was one of Jimi Hendrix's engineers. Then that stuff was land-breaking.
Yes.
Sound design, some of that Hendrix stuff on headphones is still pretty amazing. I seem to have been drawn to sound as I talk about it. Anything interesting, oh, that's interesting. Oh, that's interesting. And I probably was drawn to it beforehand, but between Bill Russo earlier in my career and then Walter Murch and the other guys that I worked with, so many of them who've gone on and just worked in film sound, they've got these gold statues called Oscars. It was a real factory for turning out the titans of sound for the next several decades. But I was a music guy, so I gravitated back to music.
And at the very beginning, am I right in saying that Chris said that you're way overqualified to come here?
That's exactly what he said, because I thought, okay, I just coming off of Apocalypse Now. If I'm going to move to LA, this is the time to go look for a job. Back in the day when we had vinyl records 12 by 12 and you could read the credits and there actually were credits available, I was a complete train spotter. I could tell you like who played bass on the third cut of some Linda Ronstadt record and what studio it was recorded at, or what studios, and who the engineers were. So I was tracking all this stuff. And Record Plant was probably as prominent on the albums that I loved as any studio in LA. So I thought, and by that time I had the connection because Tom Scott used to work at the Record Plant up north. He introduced me to Chris Stone, or he got me an interview with Chris, and Chris said, "You're overqualified." But at the time, the way they trained engineers was kind of like joining a fraternity where you get hazed. You have to prove that you can be in a room with Aretha Franklin and not lose your shit, not be overwhelmed by the star power in the room when you're in a little booth working together hours and hours and hours. He said, you either have to start out as a janitor or a runner. He said, I hired one guy who worked at EMI Studios in Sydney, made him an assistant right away, and he was never accepted into the club. He was ostracized. And he said, I'll never do that again. And you wouldn't want to do that. So he said, take your pick. I said, whatever you need. I'll drive, I'll clean up. So I was a janitor for about 6 months. And I get in there at 5:30 and 6 and clean up after all the rock stars. We won't go into what things that I found.
Well, we could, but no, this podcast is about you. But maybe for another conversation, that would be very interesting. You were there at the same time as Stevie Wonder. You were there at the same time as Aretha. Also, Jerry Beckley, who was a former guest on the show from America. I know that they recorded their second and third albums at the plant. So were you there when they were there?
I wasn't. I never crossed paths with them. I certainly was aware of them. But yeah, I got down to LA in 1980 and things were exploding. And what started happening, which was the funny thing that really got me to where I am and changed my career path, was that Hollywood discovered that the baby boomers, my generation, loved having our music in films. Mm-hmm. And Saturday Night Fever had happened, Sgt. Pepper's, even though it was a lousy movie, had happened with the Bee Gees and Peter Frampton. This was the era of Dirty Dancing, Flashdance. So Record Plant, my boss, Chris Stone, the businessman, his motto was diversify or die. And he could see the handwriting on the wall that records alone wasn't going to be able to support the cost of running the state-of-the-art technology studio. So he got us into the union so we could work film gigs, because that's a union gig. And we had 3 mobile recording trucks. And so we could take them not only to do concert venues, but we could take them on set or for TV shows because there were proper recording studios and they had enough inputs for multi-mic setups. And I started doing a lot of remote recording. After about 6 months, they put me on the crew recording the Eagles at the Forum here in LA, the live album.
So you weren't a janitor for very long?
I went from being a janitor to working on the Eagles' Long Run album. Also, we had a truck permanently parked at a studio that Stevie Wonder had bought here in LA, but he never got around, or his team never got around to putting a mixing desk in there. So we just parked the oldest truck in his parking lot and we became his studio. I didn't work on the crew that he had. He had a permanent crew and they were on call basically 24/7. They had beepers. It's such a hard life to be on call 24/7. They needed to be like military troops. They needed to be taken off the front line, a couple of weeks off. And so I would volunteer because I wanted to work with Steve. So I would go in and sub for a couple of weeks and I could do that lifestyle for a couple of weeks, but not as a permanent thing. And it was fascinating to be around Stevie and to talk to him about music. I remember having not an argument with him, but Marianne Faithfull had come out with an album called Broken English, and she used the C word. And it really offended Stevie. And we had this whole discussion about, oh, that's wrong. And I loved the album, and Steve Winwood was all over it, who was a hero of mine musically. So we were having a debate about Marianne Faithfull using the C word in one of her songs, which is commonly used by you Brits than here. For American ears, it's a very like, whoa.
No, it is. I think for British ears, it's harsh. When someone uses it, you stop in your tracks.
Well, you wouldn't know that hanging around Rod Stewart's band and Rod.
No, maybe not. No, that's true.
Everybody was a C word. Yeah, it's colorful. It's a colorful industry. So we started moving more and more into film, both with our mobile trucks, and then we built and retooled our 2 biggest studios so we could do film scoring. And then we took over Paramount's proper scoring stage that's no longer in existence called Stage M. And we put an SSL desk in there and we upgraded the technology. And well, I had the most film experience. All these other guys were record guys. So guess who got put on all this film stuff? And I was part of the team that figured out what equipment we needed and bought hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of gear. I became a purchasing agent. So I just got getting sucked in. And the more you do something, the more, oh, we get Paul, we need him on that project. We need him. So we did stuff like Jazz Singer with Neil Diamond.
Yeah.
We had a truck parked at his place, Best Little Whorehouse with Dolly Parton, Yentl with Barbra Streisand. I mean, the list of Blues Brothers, Spinal Tap. I mean, we were in the middle of it. And I found myself more on film dates than I was on record dates and doing scoring sessions and setting up mics and chairs for orchestra. I was there the night that Joe Cocker and Jennifer Warren sang Up Where We Belong for Officer.
Oh, my.
And we had done the score. Jack Nietzsche and Buffy St. Marie wrote that song, and Jack did the score. And the stuff that you get to see when you're in a supporting role, you've got a job to do and you have to do it right and correctly. But once you're set up, there can be hours where you just get to sit in the back room and observe.
How amazing. I mean, I remember Spinal Tap being one of the cult movies when I was at university, and my dear friend Baz, who would watch it once a week, I think, and would cry with laughter at Spinal Tap every time. And I think I was probably laughing more because he was laughing so much than because of the film. But to be in the room when these things are being created is quite something.
I don't think we actually recorded the music for Spinal Tap as much as they shot the scene in the studio in Studio C of the old record plant in LA.
Okay.
It's an iconic studio. It had a marble stage with glass all behind it. It was very rock and roll. So, of course, Rob Reiner, who directed that, saw the studio and went, yeah, this is where we're shooting this. Next time you watch it, that's Record Plant Studio C when they're in the studio. And they have these sound panels on wheels called gobos, and they're all rainbow-ish.
I read that you had an epiphany.
So I'd worked on all these films. Other than Apocalypse Now, when we score on films, we score out of order. We almost always, sometimes never listen to the dialogue. So I wouldn't see the movie before we were working on it. Just out of sequence, we just, okay, cue 2M5 and music was out in the stands and we recorded and the picture would roll and I'd get a sense of the look of the thing, but I wouldn't know the story. I wouldn't hear the sound. I wasn't involved in that part of it. And the epiphany was in the mid 80s, a friend of mine who was in film school at USC, which is the preeminent school here for film. He said there's some kind of lecture happening about film music. I don't remember what the topic was, but I remember that David Putnam, who was the only Brit to run a US studio, Columbia Studios, and had produced Chariots of Fire, which was one of my favorite films of the 80s. And that sound, that
Yeah, Vangelis. Amazing.
Love that thing. So I thought, oh no, that sounds interesting. Yeah, the thing about film music, that sounds on brand. So I went with my friend John Pohl, who's now a prominent picture editor. He did the Austin Powers films, among others.
Oh, brilliant.
So John said, let's go. So we went on a Saturday afternoon, and I still have a really vivid memory of, they talked about film and sound and music and what have you, but it was a demonstration. I'm self-described as a visual learner. In US terms, I'm a classic B+ student, but I love field trips. Put me in a situation, let me touch it, let me feel it, let me get a sense, let me smell it, let me watch it, let me model it, and I'm off to the races. They demonstrated that running sequence, that slow-mo with Vangelis' score. They ran the sequence without any sound, without any music. And we all knew it and it was iconic, but it doesn't have the same impact without that music.
No.
And then they purposely ran it again with, I don't remember what it was, but it was the wrong music. And then he went, oh, wow, it doesn't work. That's horrible. And then they played it with the Vangelis score. That was the epiphany. And I went, I get this. I understand this.
Right. And that was when you thought, that's what I want to do.
Yeah. I realized that whether I became the scoring mixer, whether I became the engineer that recorded the orchestras or the scores, or whether I produced it or whatever I did, I understood. I started to understand how it went. And I didn't go to film school. I had a number of friends that did, and I've always been fascinated by film. I mean, that's all I did in my high school and particularly college and post-college days was I listened to music, I went to concerts, and I went to movies. And once in a while, I got to eat out as a poor post-student. Those are the three things, but I never envisioned a career in film. It was always music, and it was always the studio. Cut to a few years after that epiphany, the same guy who took me to that talk, John Pohl, was on a TV show called TV 101 on CBS over here. And it was a 1-hour drama set in American high school. And this is the end of the 80s after CNN had been on, video journalism had been on. And the premise was an alum of the high school has been out being a video journalist, covering wars and world events. And he comes back to the high school and he turns the school newspaper into a video journal. And he gives the kids cameras and they tell the stories of high school life through the eyes of the video cameras.
That's a good idea.
It was a great idea. It was Matt LeBlanc's first series.
Yeah, Friends.
Terry Polo's first series from Meet the Parents, and a few other young actors. It was Sam Robarts, Jason Robarts, and Lauren Bacall's son was the high school teacher. We went to rock and roll, non-traditional scores to do the score for the TV show. Stuart Copeland did the pilot in one episode. Todd Rundgren did several episodes. Jeff Skunk Baxter from the Doobies and Steely Dan did episodes. Jay Ferguson, Spirit. So we were very ambitious in doing it. We bit off a bit more than we probably should have been chewing, but we did it, and we were all young, merry pranksters, and we pulled it off. Unfortunately, the show did not get picked up, but we also licensed a lot of music. And when you're a buyer licensing music, the record companies love you.
Yes.
The music publishers love you, and they all want to be your friend and get to know you. And so you get to be their friend and know them, and you start, I have those relationships going back 35 years. So then we were out of a show, and I met my best friend for life, a guy named Evian Clean, and my partner for 7 or 8 years. He now runs what is essentially the music department for HBO, and I run the music department for Warner Brothers. But we wanted to work together and keep the whole party going. So we got lucky, and the guys that produced TV 101 called us over, and they called us boys, which was very quaint because they weren't the suits, they were the sweaters. They wore pastel sweaters. They'd take their sweaters, they wouldn't put them on. They would wear them over their shoulders.
Oh, yes. I remember that look.
We referred to them as the sweaters. They all did it. And they called us over, boys, we want to talk to you. We're developing a pilot set in Southern California at the beach. It's going to have a lot of lifestyle, Southern California lifestyle, a lot of music. It was Baywatch.
Wow.
So we got in on Baywatch, which we licensed 2 or 3 songs for every episode. So we were off to the races. That was a real landmark show in terms of using music, what we call needle drops or licensed music, to score sequences, montages. Seems creative, and it worked creative, but let your obstacle be your opportunity. It also saved a lot of money because they'd have an idea for a story, but they'd get to send a second unit crew out, which is a much smaller crew and much less expensive, to go and shoot these beauty shots and tell the story in pictures. We'd find whatever, Blue Nile track, and we'd pick that for the sequence, and we'd clear it for licensing. We could put it in the show, and then they'd go out and they'd basically shoot it as a music video.
So great.
Yeah, we bought a lot of music for that show. And the other thing that happened was we didn't have a music editor to work with us all the time, and we needed to try stuff out. Oh, is this going to work against picture? What about this? What about that? And it was very crude. We would have a VHS, a tape player, and a CD player. One of us would have the TV player, and one of us have the CD. And we'd go 1, 2, 3, and we'd just play stuff wild against picture and see what stuck. And we'd identify it. And that's how I really learned music editing, was trial and error. After a while, we didn't have to look at you could watch the picture for a while and maybe try a few things, but then you could go away and listen to CDs, and Post-its I love these things. We would take CDs and we would put Post-its on it. The Q number would be 5M3, which means real 5. M means music, and it's the third Q in real 5, or whatever the nomenclature was for the time. We would write that down, and we'd write cut 7 starting at 149. And after a while, you could sort of tell, just listen to music, yeah, that's the wrong tempo. That won't work with the picture. That's too fast. That's too slow. That could be interesting. That's too dense. That's too loud. And that was how I learned how to spot a movie and spot a TV show, just trial and error. And sometimes when you get stuck, we're planning to go in the next day to pitch the producers on the show, the lifeguard, Greg Bonin, who created the show. He was an actual lifeguard. That was his dream. And we'd pitch him music the next day. So we had to have our shit together and come in with a box full of CDs with Post-its on it. Sometimes we get stuck, those late at night sessions where we didn't have enough stuff. And we just do something that wasn't supposed to work, just something so off, just kind of like a palate cleanser. You're trying to get it too precise and try to find just the right thing, and you're not finding it. So we just get goofy and go like, let's play circus music against that. And most of the time it was ridiculous, but every so often you go, oh my God, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
And sometimes we could take it in, and the producers or the director later in my career would go, wow, I've never thought of that. And you get this high contrast thing.
Yes.
Thing I love about the movies and the movie directors I love. Stanley Kubrick is one of my heroes. I've seen every one of his films multiple times. And when 2001 was the gateway drug for Stanley Kubrick for me, and using classical music against film sequence and high contrast, or playing Beethoven against Clockwork Orange violence, but with a synthesizer, just that high contrast, or playing slow elegiac music against violent scenes like Full Metal Jacket. I really like that high contrast. You don't want to do it all the time, but it's definitely a card you want to have in your deck. By the time I really got to do it on feature films and I went in-house in New Line, it was like being in the minor leagues and then getting up in the majors. And, I was ready to play the big leagues.
What's the difference between scoring for TV versus film?
They're very different in the sense of television is a producer's medium. You have what they call a showrunner, the lead producer and producers, and they run the writer's room and they run the show. The directors come in and do an episode, then they go, and another director comes in, does an episode, and they go. And maybe over the course of a season, one director would do 3 episodes, but they won't be back to back to back because they have to prep, they have to shoot, and they have to edit. And then they go on and do it. Film is a director's medium. And I liken television to short distance running, 50-yard dash, a sprint. Film is long distance running. It's a marathon. And when I went from television to feature films, I laugh because in the time that I've had film projects where we have a piece of music that, yeah, we're going to use that, we're going to license that for that sequence. And we're working on it over months, and we're testing it maybe with recruited audiences. And the director changes his mind after 3 months. I'm not feeling that anymore. I want to change. In that same 3-month period, if I was working on a TV show, we would have had half the season done and on the
air. Yeah.
And I remember being naive with my partner, Evian, on TV 101, the season showrunner, producer, running that show, he'd say, everybody called us boys, I guess. He said, boys, you don't get it. Once this train leaves the station, once we start finishing the first episode, it doesn't stop. You're way too ambitious for this short distance running. And we didn't fail miserably, but we had to run to keep up. But I am so glad I did television when I did it, because I was in great shape to do
film.
Yeah.
Well, and Evian Clean, your great friend, said of you that your love of music, passion for the art form, dedication to the craft is incredibly inspiring. You go to becoming music executive at New Line Cinema, and that's in 96. Then in 2001, you're promoted to president of music. 2009, when New Line merged with Warner Brothers, you become president of music at Warner Brothers, and you're also overseeing its in-house Water Tower record label. Before we talk about specific films, you are a music supervisor, and I was wondering if you could tell us what that means and also give us an anatomy of a project.
So, music supervisor, which is how I got into this area, and I would say that among other things, I function and my creative team function as in-house music supervisors. First time I heard the term was in the 1980s, and I was working in the studio as an assistant, and it was a very male business at the time. You didn't see women were the assistants and maybe the accountants, and it was all men. And there was a project, Urban Cowboy, that was being done, was a heavy musical thing in the early 80s. And there was a very nice, attractive blonde woman that kept showing up. All the guys are going like, well, who's that? And which guys will do, especially when we're young and stupid. Yeah. And it was a woman named Becky Shargo, who had worked at the labels, and she was, I was told, well, she's the music supervisor. And that seemed like such a queer word. Supervisor, I imagine someone with a board, clipboard out on the factory floor, like, did we make enough widgets today? So the derivation of, as I'm told, goes back to early films, maybe 30s, 40s. I've seen one, I think, on a 1940 film, music supervisor. It's because the Director Guild is very, very protective of calling any other job a director. So it's kind of an executive music director if it's more hands-on, but that really is what it amounts to. But it can't be called a director because of the Director's Guild. So the anatomy of our project, as an in-house music executive running the department and having our other executives, somebody on the project, we get multiple scripts all the time. Hey, we're thinking about making this movie. Can you read the script? We do what's called a music breakdown. And that would be based on what's actually written in the script. So it says, John is driving down the street singing to Champagne Supernova by Oasis. And so you know that, okay, that's something we have to clear. We have to make sure that we can use that and it can fit in our budget. And then John, the character, has to sing it while we're shooting it. So it's now baked into the film. If we're smart, and a lot of times we ask the director and the producers to shoot it both ways. So you could have that song licensed, but does the actor have to sing along with it? A visual vocal like that, someone singing along to a track, is a higher price than just playing in the background. And we go through and we identify anything like that, any dancing sequences, because I got to be dancing to something. We got to figure out at least what a tempo is. We have to work with a choreographer. So we mark that stuff. We also know when there's parties, cocktail parties, birthday parties, depending what they are, inevitably there's going to be some kind of music. If it's a cocktail party, we could probably get away with library classical music or piano music or something, or a jazz thing. If you've never seen the band, it would just be in the soundscape of the scene, not necessarily seen. If you see a band playing, jazz band, a pianist, then again, you have to figure out what you're going to do. You have to shoot to that. So if it feels like a period piece, if we're doing a Downton Abbey, we know that we're going to have a score. We have a sense of how much score we need, a range of it. When we budget that out, we know what the unit costs are for musicians, for studios, how many minutes, how long the film is based on the script, and the level of composer that we would need. Also look at if there is a director involved. We do our homework, or we're told that J.J. Abrams always works with Michael Giacchino. So Steven Spielberg always works with John Williams. So those are assumptions that we can make, and we know what that costs. And so we come up with a budget. Then we'll start to have a negotiation about the assumptions we made. We check it with the filmmakers, and we get a commitment from them. No, I'm not going to do that. I don't need as many songs if that's what they cost. I can drop a couple. So then we generally take a second pass at that point on the budget. There might be a third pass when everybody turns in their budgets: visual effects, post-production, physical production, music, and talent, the above the line, the cost of the director, the producer, all the key hires. So it's a multi-stage process of finding the sweet spot of what we think is, okay, this is what you need. That's the mechanics of the budget. If there's no on-camera stuff, there's no dancing, there's no singing on camera, we're kind of in the background during physical production, during the shoot, principal photography, and they go off and do it 50 days, 60 days, 75 days. And then there's a thing called director's cut that DGA, the Directors Guild, by contract has afforded the director a 10-week period to essentially, they get to play with it for 10 weeks. They don't have to show anybody. Now, if the director's confident, and a lot of them are, and they have a relationship with the studio, and it's a trusted relationship, they'll get somebody in to take a look. They'll get their creative executive in to take a look. Just, well, what do you think? Well, I think before we show it to the rest of the studio, maybe we make these, so they have a conversation. But technically, they don't have to show the movie. Then we have a director's cut. Movie, the key people, executives see the movie, and then that's when music department goes back to work in earnest. We either hired a composer or we've identified candidates for the composer, and at that point we make a decision. Or we really put the composer to work. Now, again, J.J. Abrams and Michael Giacchino, he's showing him stuff. He's probably out on the set. He's got a feel. He's probably starting to write themes. Sometimes the director has a good relationship with the composer. Previously, the composer will start to write themes without picture, just like get a feel for it, read the script, see some stuff, and just start to develop some things, give it to the music editor in the cutting room, in the editing room, so that we're starting to see, does this feel right? Is this the right mood? Is this the right size? These generally are what we call sample mock-ups. If I have a previous working relationship where I've really been in the trenches with the composer and the director before, I get involved. I go to the spotting session, which can happen multiple times, but it's where you sit down theoretically from start to finish with the director, the picture editor, the music editor, the composer, if there's an outside music supervisor possibly, or me or one of my in-house music creative execs. And we go through the film from reel 1 to reel 5 and we say, okay, I want music to start here. I want to do something here, make a comment on this here and out there. We go through and talk about where and how the music should aid the film. And it's a back and forth and review.
Does that happen a lot that you're the intermediary in a way, smoothing the way for the directors and the composers to find harmony? Haha.
It depends on the relationship I have with the director and with the composer.
Okay.
Lord of the Rings, I'm pretty much in everything. The last 2 Harry Potters, pretty much in everything. At spotting sessions, at conversations, at cue review sessions, remotely or in person, scoring sessions, mixing sessions, playback, final playback of the dub. And that's my favorite part of the job. I'm not going to deny it. My happy place is the studio, whether it's the recording studio, the composer's studio, editing room is pretty cool. the dub stage. It's all great because it's magic. It's just old school photography. You drop your image that you've used your projector to create an image, you drop it in the developer. It's a white piece of paper, and then all of a sudden an image comes up, and it gets really exciting.
It's magical.
It's the same feeling for me when every step that it starts to come together and starts to become clearer and clearer, and now it's an image.
I really would love to talk about a handful of your masterpieces. Let's start with Lord of the Rings, which is one of, if not the most ambitious trilogy of films ever made and successful. Director and screenwriter Peter Jackson. The composer was Howard Shore, and I think I'm right in saying that you were the only person at New Line who worked on every Lord of the Rings film and every film in the Hobbit trilogy. You're executive music producer. You worked closely with Peter Jackson and Fran Walsh. You were out in New Zealand, weren't you?
Quite a bit, and we scored in London at Abbey Road, Air Studios, and Watford Town Hall, which was a huge town hall with great acoustics.
Well, I have to say, it's one of my favorite movies. And I rewatched part of The Fellowship of the Ring this weekend with Henry, my son, who is obsessed to the point that he has the inscription of the ring tattooed on his forearm.
Good man.
But I mean, the scope and the scale of what you all achieved. And composer Howard Shore said of you, good guy, very good ears. How did you pick him?
You know how an event happens and then you realize that there were clues along the way that you didn't necessarily know, and later you connect.
Yes.
So when I got to New Line, it was the big leagues and working in feature films exclusively and getting to play with bigger budgets, play in a bigger sandbox. And I thought to myself, who do I want to work with? I started to identify composers that I'd like to meet, I'd like to work with. I was curious about it, I wanted to investigate. And Howard Shore was one of the people who I was really curious about. He's New York based. I'd never met him. And I thought, who is this guy? This is before Lord of the Rings is even a reality in my life. Who is this guy? He does Mrs. Doubtfire and Philadelphia. He does all those David Cronenberg weird films. Who is this guy, you know? And I was really curious, but I still hadn't met Howard. Cut to 1999. 98 was my first meeting with Peter and Fran in LA. 99, they started shooting the trilogy, and they shot all three films over a course of the main part of it. And then they would do additional photography as they put each film together in 2001, 2, and 3. And who should score this thing? Well, John Williams that's Steven Spielberg's brand. That's too obvious. He certainly has the right pedigree and the right chops and the right scale. But that's the kind of score that we felt we needed. That's the neighborhood we needed to be living in. James Horner was another possible candidate, and I knew James. He was a young composer when I was setting mics back at Record Plant in the 80s. So James and I were already acquainted with each other. James was a little, I don't know, he'd done a movie called Willow in the 80s. I think Ron Howard directed it. I don't know that I've seen the whole thing all the way. It failed in its execution. He just thought it was a bust in some regards in terms of the opportunity would seem much richer than it actually turned out. So he was a little bit dubious about Lord of the Rings and wanted to see some footage. James was a good musical friend of mine and a lovely guy. Unfortunately, he passed away about 10 years ago in a plane crash, tragically. But he wanted to see some scenes before he would throw his hat in the ring. And that didn't go over with Peter Jackson very well. He's kind of like, he needs to see something. I don't need to see him. What that would have been, we'll never know, because James was a really good composer. So sometime in the summer of 2000, while they were in the middle of shooting, Fran Walsh, who's the real musical genius in that partnership, not that Peter isn't, but she's the musician in the group. She was trying things out. Meanwhile, I was wondering who could do this. And we both came across Howard Shore in some scores, and there was one particularly called Looking for Richard with Al Pacino. And the score revealed itself as having some clues that maybe he could be a possible candidate to do this. And we independently came up with this, and then, you know, it's like, jinx, Howard Shore. And we flew him down to New Zealand. He met with them, and we hired him. And the rest is history. And it changed his life, and it changed my life, and it changed the films. And he did just an epic generational series of scores for those three movies that stand the test of time.
It's incredible. I was listening just at the weekend, and that haunting riff whenever the ring comes out is just beautiful. And then you have the Shire, and then you've got even Gandalf, Isengard, on the top of Isengard when the butterflies come, and then that's a single chorister singing. And then you have the mines where the music is, where it's all just terrifying, and that's choir. I mean, just the scope and the scale of it. And you were also producing.
Howard realized, as we got to know each other, my background was. And for a long time when I worked with composers, I hid the fact that I was a musician, and I would not give feedback. I'd not give notes in musical terms. I wouldn't talk like a musician to a musician. I'd talk like a director to a director. I once gave advice to a really good film director who was very insecure about his lack of musical knowledge or terminology, how to ask a composer to do. And I said, I knew he wasn't an actor, but I said, look, we'll call him Doug. Doug, you're not an actor, are you? And yet you work with Oscar-winning actors and get these performances out of them. How do you get that? How do you do that? And then I paused and I answered the question for him. He said, you tell them what you need from the scene. You direct them to what you need from the scene. And that's how you talk to your composer. It's the composer's job to bring you choices for what you're asking for. You don't need to know a single Italian musical term. And I took that approach with composers as I was starting to work with real good composers, to not be a musician giving them notes, but to be a music executive, music supervisor, midwife, trying to draw things out of them and lead them to the water. Howard and I broke that with him because we had so much work to do, and he used me as a sounding board, which was great. And he realized that I had an engineering background, I had a musical background, and I had a producing background. And it was so much to do, just the score, that by the second film, I was already had worked with Enya and her team indirectly. She had her own producer. They were a closed team. But by the second film, he said, you have to take on all the choir and all the guest vocalists and instrumentalists as much as possible. You have to take that off my plate. I can't do it all. So that's when I got into the Annie Lennox world and the Renee Fleming and Sir James Galway. And it's so much fun to these incredible musicians and be guiding them and directing them. I still get excited whenever I think about it. And by the time we finished Lord of the Rings, I somewhat incorrectly but thought, what's next? You want me to do the ceremonies of the Olympics? It was so big an undertaking. I think that I'm pretty safe in saying that it was in both in scope and scale and budget that I oversaw the most expensive film music project in the history of cinema.
Oh, I'm sure.
Spend that kind of money now. I could never get. After the success of the first one, my bosses were just do it again. Make it happen.
Wow. What did being in New Zealand give you?
Well, it's a spectacularly beautiful place. Lovely people. We estimated, those of us that worked on it, that by the end of the trilogy, that at the time, I think the population of New Zealand was 4 million people, that everybody in New Zealand had worked on the film, knew somebody who worked on the film, or knew somebody who knew somebody who worked on the film. Not exaggerating.
No, I'm sure that's right.
As an American in Wellington, people would say, oh, you work on Lord of the Rings? And I go, yeah. So I spent a lot of time there during editorial, not for production, not for the shoot, but as we finished each film. We did our first scoring for the first film. We actually did in the town hall in Wellington because Peter didn't have the time to go to London to do the scoring. And we did a 25-minute presentation at the Cannes Film Festival in 2001 before the film came out. So we scored the Mines of Moria sequence and some other stuff, did the Fellowship theme. We recorded that originally, and that stayed in the film. Recorded that originally in Wellington. And then we shifted over to London for the rest of the recording later that year. And then filmed Two Towers, and then Return of the King. We did all that stuff in London.
Right. And I think, didn't Peter Jackson say it was the best scoring experience he'd ever had?
Well, that was on The Hobbit.
Okay.
I saw him really grow. Peter was a director who was a perfect example of just tell the composer what you need. Peter couldn't tell a piccolo from a tuba when we started. He just knew what he wanted, and he wanted to make sure that the themes were very specific to the Elven world and to the Mines of Moria and the Fellowship and the Ring and all that stuff. He wanted to make sure that we were theme stamping all those different elements. He learned a lot over the course. We all did. When we cut to a decade later, when we were doing The Hobbit, we did the first one in London with Howard in attendance. We did the second and third one in 2013, 2014, all in Wellington. And we had to fashion a temporary studio and bring our engineers from London and record in New Zealand. And we had a wonderful orchestrator, conductor, composer named Conrad Pope, who was our secret weapon. And he's amazing. He can stand in front of an orchestra and get notes a lot of times about changes. And he just stands there and he thinks about it, looks at the score. 15 seconds, 20 seconds later, he's going, okay, so in bar 36, beat 3, I want the flutes to come in, play the theme that you played in 16 there, and repeat that for 4 bars.
Oh my gosh.
Tacit 15, don't come in until 22. He would just go through and reorchestrate on a stand. He couldn't do it every time, but Conrad was a machine. That's what Peter Jackson liked. He said, he didn't have to leave Wellington. He got to sit there and give notes. It was like spotting the film with a full orchestra in front of you and making changes on the fly. And that's what he said to me.
Okay.
I love this. We're going to do a Gollum film, start shooting next year. And Andy Serkis is directing and starring as Gollum again.
Oh, fantastic.
Peter and Fran and Philippa Boyens are producing. And we are planning to, in the middle of budgeting and planning for that, we'll score in 2027 in Wellington at the Town Hall, which has been under renovations for earthquake retrofit, but it'll be ready for us to go back, and Peter will get to score like he did before.
Like he wants to.
We're bringing Conrad Pope back.
How exciting. You've worked with producer David Heyman on the Harry Potter series, also Fantastic Beasts, Barbie and Wonka and more. And David said of you, and I quote, "Paul cares about filmmakers. He works tirelessly in support of their vision. He is wonderful at translating what I say into language that can be understood by composers and musicians. It's a real gift, and I don't think I've ever found an ally in the music world quite like him." So Harry Potter, my children grew up watching Harry Potter. I think I might be, even though I was an adult when I watched them, I think I might be Harry Potter's biggest fan. Even when COVID struck, we consoled ourselves by watching a Harry Potter film a day, my children and I. Can you just take us there and give us a flavor of what that was like?
So while we were making Lord of the Rings, Warner Brothers, which was our sister company and was making Harry Potter. And we were very much in competition, New Line and Warner Brothers, of these two iconic series that were created at the same time. So much so that after Fellowship came out and was so successful, Potter used to be released right before Christmas, between our American Thanksgiving and Christmas. That was also our dates. They moved back to November to stay out of each other's way. So I did not work on the first 5 or 6 films. I worked on the last 2.
Okay.
The last 2 were composer Alexandre Desplat, who I'm very proud to say that I gave him his first U.S. studio film back in 2004, a film called Birth.
Oh.
Beautiful score. One of my favorite pieces of music I've been involved in is the overture, the opening of that film. Just thinking about it gives me goosebumps.
Okay, I'm going to listen.
It's a beautiful piece of music, the overture for Birth. And we became really good friends through all that. And I've done a number of films with Alexandre over the years. And so he was already hired when I made the move over to Warner Brothers. So now I was in charge of the music department for the last 2 with Alexandre. And that was the first time I'd worked with David Heyman.
Okay.
There's 1 or 2 producers that I've worked with a lot. And I think David I've worked with the most of any producer. Because we've done Fantastic Beasts, we did the last 2 Potters, we did Barbie. It seems like I'm always in David's lane, which is great. I love David. He's the gold standard as far as I'm concerned. Alexandre was a very lyrical composer, and I knew him well, so I could help guide David Yates, who was the director in the last 4. I could shorthand the conversation between them because David's very meticulous and very precise. And Alexandre, knowing him as a friend as well as a composer, he's more fluid, very French, like, let's get on. I have not time for this.
Yeah.
So I was definitely a midwife because the series had been very successful. And I just felt like a caretaker in the most positive way possible. Let's bring this thing home. And those are the darker movies.
They are very dark, those movies.
So I end up with the dark ones. But I love being a part of it. And I love working with David Yates. I love working with David Heyman, David Barron, the three Davids that were on those films. Those guys were all new for me, and they invited me in and trusted me, and I could give them the hard news and they'd listen to it. And with a quiet authority, it's nice when you save yourself for when you really need to speak up and say, I see this as a potential problem and let's get ahead of it. And whether it was schedule or money or whatever it was. So I'm just proud to have been a part of that.
Moving on to Barbie, because that was the highest grossing film of 2023, and it's the 14th highest in the world, I read. And in that film, you were working with composers Andrew Wyatt and Mark Ronson. And I love Mark's song, I'm Just Ken. Anywhere else, I'd be a 10. I mean, that's just the most fantastic lyric. Andrew Wyatt said of you, Paul knows how to spot magic happening and channel that so it has the greatest impact on people. And Mark Ronson described you as a kindred spirit, humble dude. He's great at lots of jobs, and it's really hard to wear all those hats, to be a friend to artists and musicians and still be able to run the whole division of a studio. But he really straddles that line in a special way that few people do. So in that film, you had famous artists writing songs. I don't know whether they were writing the songs or someone else was writing the songs for them, but you had Lizzo, Billie Eilish, who won an award for What Was I Made For? Dua Lipa. I love Dua Lipa's song. Can you just talk us through those films when you have different artists? Because I understand with Lord of the Rings, it's an orchestra. Howard has composed everything, whereas this is a different game. How does it work?
People watching Barbie probably have, and we hope this is the reaction they have or the impression they have, is that we had it all figured out, and we didn't. It was a very magical thing the way it came together, but it wasn't obvious. It wasn't obvious that we were going to get it right necessarily, or get it all right, or have a unified film the way that it came out, both in content, style, and everything about it. And Greta Gerwig, our director, knew and was friendly with Mark Ronson. So normally in my area, we read a script, we budget, we have conversations, and we come to an agreement, and then they go off and shoot it. And myself and my team don't really get heavily involved until post-production, editorial, and finishing the film. However, whenever we have something on camera, like a song, dancing, there's music involved, something has to be written, something has to be identified that you're going to shoot to, then we're involved and we're on set, or we hire a music supervisor, somebody to make sure that the music is working through the eyes of what's being shot. If there's lip sync, that it's in sync, all that stuff. It's only like being a script supervisor. You're watching from a musical perspective. Are we getting this right? Does it look right? Is it going to play right? So Greta approached Mark, and Mark and Andrew are partners in lots of projects, to create I'm Just Ken, because obviously they had to shoot that whole sequence.
Yeah.
And the Dua Lipa song for the dance off. So those two things were created, weren't completely finished, but the framework of them and the lyrics and everything that had to be done in order to shoot those sequences was done. And then when Greta got into her director's cut, that period after we wrapped physical production and we're getting into post-production, the director gets to have 10 weeks by Directors Guild rules. And Greta realized that she needed music. And ironically, all things lead to Alexandre Desplat. Alexandre had done her previous film, Little Women, that came out several years ago. And he was on board. She thought he'll do this one. But he was on another film and wasn't going to be available till the beginning of 2023, I guess. We're back 3 years ago. And so she needed something for an opening sequence. She went to Mark and said, hey, could you guys try something here? And could you try something there? And just even to have a sketch that she could try and see if it was working and try and get the tone and the flavor of it and the shape of it right. And so it kind of evolved, and they put such a musical imprint on the film that we quickly realized that this is the way we needed to go as opposed to a traditional score. So we made the move off Alexandre, total agreement, nothing scandalous. Just sometimes you have to make a call and go, we're making discoveries here. And I've got Mark and Andrew writing songs. It just evolved. And then we partnered with our label, and Atlantic Records joint ventured on the soundtrack. And the Atlantic guys came in, and our music supervisor, George DeCoulius, we just started crafting like, oh, who could we bring together that would be interesting? And a lot of people wanted to work with Mark, no surprise there. And there were a lot of people that Mark wanted to work with that he'd never gotten a chance to. So it just
happened
came together. And it was all going great. But the Billie Eilish song, we got it, we just went, holy moly.
And did she write that, or did Mark write that?
No, she and her brother Phineas, who's her co-creator.
Yes.
And the story goes something like, probably not exactly right, but it went along the lines they were working on something else and they were stuck. And Phineas may have said to Billy, you want to take a crack at that Barbie song we're supposed to do? And they wrote it in less than half an hour.
Oh my gosh. That seems unfair for the rest of people who are trying to write, spend months trying to write something.
We're just mere mortals, Katie.
American History X. So this is a fantastic film written by David McKenna, directed by Tony Kaye, Ed Norton, who is one of my most favorite actors. And I rewatched it because I knew ahead of speaking to you. And I mean, it's just an incredible film. And I was expecting Eminem vibes, totally different, super effective. How did that come about?
This goes back to Stanley Kubrick. Tony Kaye is a very creative, he's become a friend. I love Tony, but he had a reputation. He was a big commercial director. Tony liked extreme contrast, going to Kubrick. So I'd been told, good luck. He's very creative and very mercurial, and do your thing. He comes into a meeting with the roundtable of the executives and Dave McKenna, and they're pitching that it could be like a skater boy punk. They even talked about we should get some authentic neo-Nazi punk bands. And I said, wait, no, we're not doing that. This is a major corporation. We're not going to give money to anybody who's a Nazi. Going back to Tony got quite upset, and I'm sitting next to him. I just met him. And at the time, his head was shaved, and I could tell he was getting beet red and upset. And I leaned over to him. And sometimes I'm cheeky, and I wonder, why did you do that? And I leaned over him and said, in a way that nobody else probably heard him, I said, I know you. And he looks at me like, huh? And I kind of snapped him out of his whatever state he was in.
Yeah.
You just met me. And I go, I know you. You love Kubrick, don't you? His eyes get really wide. And he goes, I love Kubrick. And that was my way in with him. And again, when we hadn't hired a composer, and I knew he'd work with Ann Dudley on an advert, and I felt the chemistry of a woman composer and Tony was a good fit. If he wanted to go very elegiac against the violent scenes, like the murder of the brother at the end, we cracked the code with that scene. Tony wasn't sure what he wanted to do, and I found a piece of Ann's from an album called Ancient and Moderns that was very, Samuel Barber's Adagio for strings like.
Yes.
And I played it with a Post-it and took it in the cutting room and played it for Tony. I said, I think I've got your answer here. And that's how we cracked the code.
And it's incredible.
And we hired Ann. And he already knew Ann. And so there was a comfort factor. And she's a wonderful musician, a really gentle soul, a good friend. And it was a joy to work on.
Gravity was considered one of the best films of 2013. It was directed by Alfonso Cuarón. It stars Sandra Bullock and George Clooney, and they're American astronauts who attempt to return to Earth after the destruction of their space shuttle. What did Alfonso want from the music, and why did you pick the unknown Stephen Price?
Again, it's circumstantial, and you can solve the mystery in retrospect. So my first time I met Alfonso in London, Warner Brothers film exec said, oh, you need to meet Alfonso because we were going to work on this film. The three of us had dinner, and Alfonso is a very charming guy and very funny. And he said to me, Paul. He said, I hate frigging Hollywood film music. I hate it. Hate it. And I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that. Okay. Okay. What do I do with that? I said, well, why don't you try some different things and see if you can find your way in, and then we can figure out how to achieve that. I had no idea where we're going to go with it. So he goes into his director's cut and post-production. I'm not involved with the shoot at all. He needs to put some music to present the film to the studio. I believe it's a phone call. He's in London, I'm in LA, and he says, I've got this music editor who he's also a composer. He'll try some things, and then something's not working. He'll go away and he'll create something that bridges the pieces that we have and the empty spots that we're trying to fill. And he said, what do you think? I mean, is that okay? And I said, well, who's this guy? Who's this music editor? He said, Stephen Price. Well, Stephen was part of the team on Lord of the Rings. He was one of our music editors on Lord of the Rings. So I knew Stephen very well. I knew that he was musical. He'd done a couple films. And so I said, well, let's give it a try. And he just continued, and we've hired him as the composer, and he won the Oscar for Best Score.
Yeah, he did. I watched it again recently. I've been having such a nice time watching all these films, and it's brilliant. It's not really music, as in lyrical, but it is so effective.
Alfonso made rules that we had to follow. There's no sound in space. So the metal hitting metal, those scenes of the space station breaking up, there would be no sound in space. So Stephen had to provide that. So look, that goes back to my training with Walter Murch. I was ready for that job.
Yes.
Sure, the score can be musical sound design. Why not?
Yeah, it was fantastic. Worked brilliantly.
I had confidence and talked to Stephen about it and talked to Alfonso, and that's how it came about. So it's not sound design, it's the score. It's what you would identify as the musical element of the score and everything else.
Hans Zimmer, well, he's one of my favorite composers, but you and he are great friends and you've worked together a lot. He praised you for many things. One was for your patience, but he also said that in the face of some of his crazy ideas, you and he would talk your way through an idea until it was sane enough that it could truly work. Can you tell us about one of his more insane ideas and how you made it work?
Hans will admit that he's truly self-effacing. And he said, look, from time to time, I'll start a new film and go, do I have anything left in the tank? Do I have any new ideas? And he cleverly has devised a scheme to motivate himself to come up with some kind of concept. When he did the Sherlock Holmes movies a dozen years ago or so, it had a steampunk vibe to it. Guy Ritchie directed it. And so Hans came up with this idea, let's go really steampunky, whatever that means. And they took a upright piano and they busted it apart with sledgehammers and recorded the sounds of metal on metal and incorporated that in the score. That kind of stuff. The Walter Murch background, sure, why not? That's
Yes.
So Hans generally will come up with something to keep himself interested. On Interstellar, he remembered that when Ron Howard was shooting the Da Vinci Code, that they got to shoot at the Temple Lodge in the city. It's actually a Knights Templar lodge. There's two lodges, and there's a rose line, and they split the temple, and there's knights' effigies on the floor. It's crazy. And somehow only Hans Zimmer can talk his way in to be able to record the score with this big pipe organ that's just been refurbished. And we went in there and recorded a small chamber group and this huge organ. That's what the score to Interstellar is. It's an incredible score. So Hans would come up with that, and then he'll blurt out what he wants to do. And he said, am I crazy? Maybe, but it could work. So I think that's what he's referring to. And I love the fact that he called me an anarchist.
Yes, he did.
I'm a closet anarchist, creatively.
You're president of Warner Brothers Music. You've just formulated a joint venture with the Cutting Edge Group, with Philip Morross. Where do you hope this business will be in the next 5 years?
It's funny, I just had lunch with Philip. He's over here.
Oh, is he?
Philip came up and had a work lunch with me and my former partner, Evian Clean, who he also knows. So I'm getting to know him. I knew of him, but I only met him about a year and a half ago when we were in the middle of trying to figure out, we're going to form this joint venture and how's it going to work. And we're both really proud of the outcome. He came out with the best outcome if we were going to do something like this as a way to raise capital and bring a partner in this area, the cutting edge model with Universal. music publishing continuing to be our administrator. It's a huge catalog. To move a huge catalog from one administrator to another or to sell it outright is, imagine it's like moving day at the Louvre.
Yeah.
Something's going to get lost.
Yes.
We managed to keep what we had and just create a new entity together as a joint venture where now Philip Cutting Edge is our partner in our catalog up through June 30th of 23, I think. And so we're just trying to figure out clever ways that we could add value that we're not doing now.
Okay.
Take some iconic stuff and maybe do sports jams versions of some great themes that can be played at football matches and baseball games and basketball games and that sort of thing. Whether we broaden out into working with artists again, which is something that our label, in-house label, Watertower Music, did back in the aughts. We just were too small and realized we were having success with some of the artists on our label, but it costs a lot of money to tour support, to get a band out on the road, and you have to do that. Because that's where they're going to make money, if they're going to make money, probably, at least initially. Powers that be at New Line at the time said, that's an expensive part of the business. So we retreated from that and just are exclusively a soundtrack business. But we started talking about things that we could do by creating another entity together or by combining forces. Cutting Edge has a smaller boutique soundtrack label called Lakeshore. It was formed by a company that I don't think exists anymore, a production company called Lakeshore. We talked about, could we merge the two companies and be better for it? Or it's all ideas at this point. And Philip's really great. He's like a kid in all the great ways. He's just curious. He's got that twinkle in his eye. When you partner with or work with people like that, good things can come out of it.
And on top of this, Paul, you're also lecturing at prestigious universities like USC, Berklee School of Music, Columbia College Chicago. If you could only give one piece of advice to graduates who want to have a career in music for film, what would it be?
I just had an exit interview conversation with one of the interns we've had for the summer. She's a young woman who's got one more year of undergraduate at UCLA. And she's not quite sure which path she wants to go in the entertainment industry. And this is something I've developed in doing a mentoring program during COVID. A friend of mine, Sophia Chang, developed a program called UP, and it's focuses on not just music or film, focuses on professionals taking on a mentee for 1 year and doing 1 hour a month with a mentee. It's kind of a life coach vibe with a little bit of armchair therapy thrown in. I said this yesterday to the young woman. In Western society, for sure, we have an opportunity to get out in the world, to graduate from university or whatever we do. And now we're starting out in life. We're freshmen of life. So I'm going to tell you something that people won't tell you. I'm going to give you a secret. You have superpower. People your age, people young in their 20s, you have a superpower. She looked at me like, what are you talking about? And there's a reason why, other than aging out and having to replace the workforce, why not just in entertainment, not just in music, not just in film, law, finance, they're hungry for the best and the brightest of the young people and recruiting them. They don't have to pay them as much. You got companies like, they're sort of taking advantage of that, but you don't have the experience. But what you have, your superpower is you don't have experience. So what do you draw from? Imagination. You draw from imagination. And you can tell the older generation that now has had experience and they tried things and it didn't work. Maybe it was situational. Maybe it could work now. You don't have those boundaries. You don't have those hangups. You have imagination. You can only imagine how things could be. You can only imagine how things work. As you start to work, by the time you maybe 4 or 5 or 6 years, you're going to start to shift from pure imagination to experience. And as you get towards 10 years, maybe 30s, you're going to start to have more experience and imagination. And you're going to, if you don't cultivate it, you're going to start to lose touch with your imagination. And so I told her, you got to stay curious, eternally curious, till you take your last breath. And you got to be excited and you got to exercise your imagination. Because when you start out, that's your superpower. Don't let the people know that you have a superpower and just subversively, quietly, in a positive way, exercise that.
That's amazing advice. Early in the year, you were awarded the LACO Hollywood Ally Award. The musicians, composers, film directors, and producers all paid tribute to your enormous contribution to music. They described how much you care. They talked about how much you support them and the respect that you give to all of them and the music, how calm you are, how just by being in the room makes the recording go better. And I guess that's partly who you are and the kindness you show to everyone. But I guess it's also because you've been in everyone's shoes. You've assumed every role. You're a composer, a brilliant musician, an arranger, conductor, editor, engineer, and producer. And the video is just a wonderful and fitting tribute to the contribution that you have made. And I would like to share the link so that listeners can watch that video. But thank you so much, Paul, for talking to me. You've led such an interesting life. Oh my goodness. The people you've met, the creations that you have orchestrated. I mean, your achievements and accolades are just off the charts, and some have even been in the charts. But I'm looking forward to more great movies with your wonderful music in them. Having researched you and having talked to you, I don't know where you're going to have the time for this, but you really need to add writing your memoirs to your to-do list whenever you can. But thank you so, so much.
Thank you, Katie. It's been a real pleasure to talk to you.
You've been listening to Bandwidth Conversations. Thanks to Anna B., Head of Marketing, to all of the podcast consultant, to Bagawire for the music, to the Money Maze podcast. Thank you for listening. Any feedback, please email me, katie@bandwidthconversations.com. Please sign up on our website, www.bandwidthconversations.com, so we can notify you about new podcast releases. We hope to see you again soon.